"Step away from the car," he barked, hand on his gun, eyes full of suspicion. He didn't care that my niece was in the back seat. He didn't care that I was calm, compliant. Black was all he saw. But when he yanked open my door and saw the ID on my seat, he froze. The gold seal of the President of the United States stared back at him, and in that moment, the man who thought he held all the power realized he had just pointed a gun at the Deputy National Security Advisor. And the world was about to find out, because racism doesn't check credentials. But this time, the badge didn't protect him. He pointed at me like I was a suspect in a robbery, hand on his holster, voice sharp enough to slice through bone. "Step away from the car. Now." I had just finished buckling my niece into her car seat when I looked up. The sun was setting behind the Walgreens, casting long shadows on the blacktop. A lazy breeze stirred the plastic bag caught under my tire. I blinked, slow and confused. I wasn't speeding. Wasn't parked in a red zone. Wasn't doing anything wrong. Still here he was, a white cop, early 40s, buzz cut so tight it looked like punishment mirrored shades hiding his eyes, but I could feel the way he looked at me. Like I didn't belong. Like he wanted a reason. I straightened slowly. "Is there a problem, officer?" He stepped closer now, one hand resting on the butt of his gun. "You're making people nervous, sir." I glanced around. There was no one near me but a mother dragging her kid toward the pharmacy entrance, avoiding eye contact. Nervous. Was it the fact that I was black, that I was driving a matte black Range Rover with DC plates, or that I had just dropped a bottle of baby formula in the front seat? "License and registration. Step away from the vehicle." His voice was louder this time. A command. People were watching now through windshields, behind cell phones, behind silence. I raised my hands. I'm unarmed. My niece is in the car. I said, "Step away." That's when I saw him undo the strap on his holster, and something inside me snapped back to a different memory. Kabul, 2010. Flashing lights. A boy holding a water jug being mistaken for a suicide bomber. The way the air gets heavy right before someone makes a mistake they can't take back. This wasn't Kabul, but this was war too. A different kind. One you fight with skin color instead of flags. I took a breath. My name is James Langston. 41. A father, an uncle, a son. But more than that, I serve as Deputy National Security Advisor under the Office of the President of the United States. I've read threats in Arabic intercepted codes from rogue nations, sat in rooms where the air was thicker than lies, and yet none of it prepared me for being just another black man in a parking lot. I wasn't wearing my badge. Didn't think I'd need it just to grab diapers. That was my mistake. The cop's name, I would learn later, was Officer Trent Hawley. A 10-year veteran of the force, commended for bravery, twice sued for racial profiling. He didn't recognize me. Not yet. To him, I was just one more threat in an expensive vehicle. The kind of man you neutralize before you understand. Turn around and place your hands on the hood. My niece, little Bella, whimpered from the back seat. She didn't cry often, but even she could feel the shift in the air. I stayed still. The heat of the hood radiated against my fingertips. I said, "Turn around." A few more seconds and he'd escalate. They always do. But I wasn't going to reach for anything. I wasn't going to move too fast. Not with Bella in the car. Not with my life hanging on the trigger finger of a man who didn't ask questions. He grabbed my wrist, hard, twisting. I didn't resist. He shoved me against the hood. My breath left me. "Do you own this car?" he barked. I didn't answer, not yet. Then it happened. He opened the driver's side door, reached in and spotted the leather folio on my passenger seat. It had slipped out of my briefcase when I'd turned to help Bella. He yanked it up, flipped it open, and there it was, the deep Navy ID card, gold embossed, centered with the presidential seal of the United States of America. My name, my clearance, my authority. He froze. A beat passed, then another. His lips parted. The arrogance in his posture drained like air from a balloon. "You," he stammered. I slowly turned my head. "You just laid hands on a federal official. And you pointed a weapon at my niece." He stepped back, nearly tripping over his own feet. The radio on his chest crackled. Sirens. Someone had called it in. Not the cop, a bystander, maybe. A security guard from the pharmacy was now rushing out waving his arms, and just like that the situation flipped. But I didn't move. I didn't run. I stood there tall, still, and silent, because I needed him to feel it, the weight of what he'd just done, the cost of his assumptions, the way he'd almost ended a child's day with blood and sirens, and because I knew this wasn't over. That night, after the police chief called me personally to express concern, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something deeper, a warning, that even proximity to power can't erase the color of your skin, that racism doesn't check IDs before it acts. I tucked Bella into bed, brushed her curls back from her forehead. She was already forgetting. I wished I could, but I couldn't, because this wasn't just about me. This was about every man who didn't have that seal, every man who didn't get that pause, every child who wouldn't make it home because someone like Officer Hawley didn't wait long enough to see a badge. And I knew what I had to do next. By morning, my name was in every inbox from Capitol Hill to Langley, not because I wanted it, but because someone had filmed the entire incident from the moment Officer Hawley placed his hand on his holster to the stunned silence when he stared at the presidential seal in his trembling fingers. The video was 29 seconds long, 29 seconds that lit up the internet like a flare in a dark field. Hashtags, outrage, think pieces. And yet none of it made me feel safe, because outrage is loud, but change is slow. I sat in my office, 4th floor of the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, the corridor that smells of old wood and urgency. Outside my window, Lafayette Park lay soaked in pale sunlight. Inside the room was quiet, too quiet, until the knock. 3 soft raps, then a familiar voice. James. It was Elaine Porter, my chief of staff, sharp-tongued, brilliant, unafraid of anything except bad coffee and injustice. She closed the door gently behind her. They want a statement. I didn't look up. They always want something. States rattled. Homelands watching. The press corps is circling like it's feeding time. I let the silence stretch my fingers, pressed against my lips. Elaine stepped closer, her heels clicking like punctuation. "You know what they're really afraid of?" she asked. "That if this can happen to you, it means their power doesn't protect them either." I looked up at her then and saw something new behind her eyes. Not just loyalty, fear, for me, for herself, for her sons. I remember my father's voice when I was 10 years old after a neighbor called the police because he had the nerve to mow our lawn at sunset. "Don't run, James. Don't talk back. Don't move too fast." Even back then he knew. And now I was a grown man in a dark suit with a federal clearance level that could unlock nuclear protocols. And still, all it took was one man with a badge and a gun to reduce me to a threat. Later that afternoon I received a call, not from the police department, not from the press, but from President Armitage himself. His voice was deep, clear, practiced the kind of voice that belonged on old vinyl records and war documentaries. "Langston," he said, You okay? I paused, unsure how much to say. The President of the United States, a man whose hand I'd briefed 3 times that month, was now asking if I was okay being profiled like a common criminal. I'm breathing, sir, I replied. He exhaled. That's more than some men in your shoes get. That silence afterward was thick. He knew. He had seen the video. Langston, he said again, you have full clearance to handle this as you see fit. No leash. No leash. That meant I wasn't just allowed to respond. I was expected to. But I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted something harder. Accountability. I called a meeting that night. Not with lawyers, not with aides, but with men and women like me. People who walked through power corridors by day and walked through suspicion every time they took off the suit. There was Dr. Raheem Wells, Deputy Director at Homeland. Tamika Crowley, Liaison to the Intelligence Committee. Marcus Hill, an African-American analyst from the Pentagon who'd been detained on his own block last year because he fit a description. We met in the basement of a cafe, 2 blocks from the Capitol, away from cameras, titles, and uniforms. We're not exceptions. Tamika said, her voice steady. We're just better at hiding it. Dr. Wells nodded. We all have stories. But stories alone don't shift systems. We sat around a table of cold tea and warm pain, and we made a plan, not for one cop, but for the ones who trained him, protected him, believed he was right until he wasn't. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked to the D.C. Metro. No suit, no badge, just a hoodie, black jeans, sneakers. I walked like every other brother who'd been stopped, searched, humiliated. And I watched how the station attendant stared at me a second too long. How 2 officers hovered near the stairs when I entered. How a mother gently pulled her daughter closer when I stood next to her. They didn't know who I was, and that was the point. The next week, I stood before the Joint Task Force on Civil Oversight. A quiet hearing room with too much marble and not enough justice. I spoke slowly, not as a victim, but as proof. Proof that America's sickness doesn't check credentials, that its rot runs deeper than any one uniform, that if I could be slammed against my own car while my niece cried for me, then no one was safe. Not without change, not without truth. Officer Hawley had been placed on administrative leave, which meant he was probably at home watching this on TV, drinking coffee paid. But I wasn't finished with him yet, because what he did wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror, and I was going to make the whole nation look. The hardest thing about truth isn't telling it. It's living it when everyone around you pretends they can't see the mirror you're holding up. 2 days after the hearing, a letter arrived at my home. No return address. Just a thick manila envelope slid under my door like a whisper left in fear. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, no name. Mr. Langston, I've seen what that officer did. I've worked with him. You're not the first. If you want the truth, meet me where they hold the silence under the overpass at Benning Road. Thursday, 9:00 p.m. Come alone. I wasn't surprised. Power always casts a shadow, and sometimes the truth only comes from the cracks in the concrete. I didn't tell anyone, not even Elaine, because this wasn't protocol. This was personal. Thursday night, the air was thick with city sweat. That humid kind of silence before a thunderstorm. I parked 3 blocks away and walked. My footsteps echoed under the graffiti-tagged columns. The hum of traffic above masked every breath. Then he stepped out of the dark, a younger white man. Civilian clothes, but the stance gave him away military or trained like one. Square jaw eyes scanning constantly. Nervous but resolved. Name's Tyler, former patrol, 6th District. I didn't say anything. He handed me a flash drive. "There's dash cam footage they buried," he said. "Internal reports. Complaints filed." One of them was from a mother who said Officer Hawley pointed a gun at her autistic son when he didn't respond fast enough. I felt my jaw lock. She disappeared after that. Moved states, no lawsuit, no media. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because when I saw the video of what he did to you," he said, "I realized something. If they'll do that to a man who walks in the West Wing, then we're all just one heartbeat from being next." The next day, I sat in front of my laptop watching the footage in silence. It wasn't just bad. It was monstrous. Officer Hawley, over and over, escalating nothing into war. Minor stops turned into weapons drawn. Black drivers, brown kids, Spanish-speaking elders. Every video told the same story power without conscience. One clip froze me. A 12-year-old boy bike tires still spinning as he was handcuffed for fitting the description. He had been walking home from chess club. I felt something rupture inside me. I wasn't going to the press. Not yet. I was going to the Department of Justice. Elaine slammed the folder shut when I showed her. "This will explode everything," she whispered. "Good. I mean everything, James. This department, this city. You'll be a pariah. They'll try to make you the angry black man, the political liability. You'll be alone." I looked her in the eye. I've been alone. My whole life, I've lived behind glass. Smiled while bleeding. Sat silent in meetings where I was the only one who knew what silence cost. "I'm not afraid of being alone, Elaine." I stood. "I'm afraid of doing nothing." The DOJ Internal Affairs meeting wasn't scheduled. I didn't wait for an appointment. I walked in, with the folder, with the footage, with fire in my throat. Their expressions changed as they watched. They shifted in their seats. Eyes darted. Hands clenched. Because this wasn't politics anymore. This was proof. Undeniable. Raw. Deadly. When the video stopped, no one spoke. Until one man, Assistant Director Moore, cleared his throat. "This goes beyond local misconduct. It's a system," I said. "He's the symptom." Moore rubbed his temple. "We'll investigate." "No," I replied. "You'll prosecute." But power doesn't give up power without a fight. That night, my phone rang. Unknown number. A voice I didn't recognize. "You made a mistake." Click. 2 hours later, I found my tires slashed. My daughter's kindergarten enrollment suddenly under review for security inconsistencies. And the story in the National Reporter the next morning read, "Langston's leverage insider drama or political theater." The machine was moving, and it was coming for me. But the thing about fire is that once it's started, it spreads. The videos leaked. I didn't leak them, but someone did. Maybe Tyler, maybe another soul tired of pretending. Either way, the internet exploded again. Except, this time, it wasn't just black and brown folks crying foul. It was veterans, teachers, mothers, a retired FBI agent who went on record saying I served with Langston. He briefed us in war zones. That officer should be in jail. And then, something unexpected. A letter from the president, hand-delivered, inside. "James, I told you no leash. You ran with it. You've got my full backing. Let's make this bigger than one man. Let's tear down the system that made him." Armitage. For the first time in weeks, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This wasn't just a personal reckoning anymore. This was national. But with every step forward, the danger grew. And in the shadows, someone was still watching. Still waiting. Because exposing a monster is one thing. Surviving the backlash is another. And I had a target on my back now. A big one. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. They called it a review board. 5 men in suits. 1 woman with a clipboard. A circle of authority sitting behind a U-shaped table like gods pretending to be human. They didn't make eye contact. They didn't smile. Just nodded politely when I entered, the kind of nod reserved for a problem too loud to ignore, but too dangerous to fully acknowledge. This wasn't a trial. This was theater, and I was the unexpected actor who'd shown up with a script they hadn't written. Elaine whispered before I stepped in. Remember, they're not here to listen. They're here to control the fallout. She wasn't wrong. The Department of Justice had been pushed into this emergency session by the pressure of public outrage, bipartisan heat, and a slow-burning fear that if this wasn't addressed, it would become a wildfire they couldn't contain. I stood unblinking. I'm not here to grandstand, I began. I'm here to ask one question. How many more videos do you need before you understand this isn't about Officer Hawley? It's about who trained him, who promoted him, and who protected him after the first complaint. Someone shifted. Papers rustled. A cough. I didn't stop, because you knew. The complaints, the footage, the suppressed dash cams. They didn't disappear. They were buried. And you buried them. Silence. Then the woman with the clipboard cleared her throat. Mr. Langston, you're suggesting systemic intent. Do you have evidence of coordinated concealment? I leaned in. I have 24 internal memos, 8 time-stamped cover-up emails, and 3 whistleblower testimonies. I dropped the flash drive onto the table. The click echoed like a bullet casing on marble. Evidence, I said, doesn't need permission to be real. They recessed early that day, which meant I had rattled the gate. But gates don't fall easy. That night, I found a threat painted across my garage door in red spray paint. You think your badge makes you untouchable. Think again. I called no one, just stared at it. Took a photo, then picked up a brush and painted over it myself. Because erasing threats doesn't make them disappear. It just makes room for what comes next. That next came quicker than I thought. 2 days later, while picking up Bella from preschool, a man in a gray hoodie followed me back to my SUV. Kept a distance. Close enough to feel. Not close enough to grab. I stopped. He stopped. Turned. He turned. Then I pivoted hard, hand reaching into my jacket not for a gun but my federal ID. He froze. I stared into his face. Early 20s. Pale. Jaw tight with something hatred maybe. Or fear that had festered into something worse. You following me, son? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. Just flicked his chin toward me and said, You think the country's yours now. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. I know who it belongs to, I said. All of us. Then he walked away. Later that week, I was summoned. Not to DOJ, to the Oval Office. I hadn't expected it. President Armitage wasn't a man for unnecessary meetings. But when I entered, he was standing by the resolute desk, a thin folder in his hand, the presidential seal behind him like a silent verdict. James, he said, sit down. I did. He placed the folder in front of me. Read. I opened it. Inside were transcripts, emails, witness accounts. Not just about Officer Hawley, but about 3 other officers, across 2 departments, and above them. Names I recognized from federal appointment rosters, people who'd used their power not just to cover up abuse, but to enable it. He let me absorb it, then said, This goes deeper than you thought. Yes, I whispered, and now it's bigger than me. He nodded once. You have clearance to act. Full scope. Task force. Funding. But this time, you're not going in alone. He gestured to the door, and that's when she stepped in. Agent Louisa Monroe, FBI, internal affairs, and the best in her division. Sharp eyes, even sharper mind. Latina, 5'7", but with the presence of a wrecking ball in a hurricane. I'll be your shadow, she said. And your hammer. We launched the investigation quietly, called it Operation Null Shield, because the badge, when abused, should shield no one. We started with Hawley, built the case from the bottom up. Emails, payroll records, patrol logs altered post-incident, fellow officers bribed to forget dash cam malfunctions, a sergeant who signed off on Hawley's last 5 promotions while quietly accepting campaign donations from private security contractors tied to weaponized policing initiatives. It was all there, wrought, hidden under polished boots and paperwork, and as we pulled back the curtain, one name rose higher than the rest. Deputy Chief Vernon Sykes, white, 56, 30-year veteran, decorated, quoted in dozens of papers about law and order, beloved by the brass, untouchable. But his signature was on everything. I looked at Monroe across the briefing room table one night, the clock pushing 2:00 a.m., her face lit by the cold light of the evidence board. We take him down, I said. We're not just hitting a department. We're hitting the system. She nodded. Good. What came next would need planning, precision, and risk. Because Vernon Sykes didn't play defense. He built the rules, but we were about to break them. All of them. The press had no idea. Not yet. They still circled around the smaller fires, the footage, the backlash, Officer Hawley's suspension. They didn't know a storm was building behind closed doors. Monroe and I had been playing chess in the dark, and tonight we were moving our queen straight across the board. It started at 5:03 a.m., a federal warrant, 3 black SUVs, 4 armed agents from Internal Affairs, and at the center of it all standing barefoot on his marble porch in a robe that probably cost more than my first car, Deputy Chief Vernon Sykes. He didn't shout, didn't protest, just smiled, like he'd already prepared his next move. I was watching from the adjacent vehicle, Monroe beside me, hand resting on her holster like it was part of her skin. This is the part where they either beg or bluff, she muttered, but Sykes didn't do either. He nodded at us as they led him down his front steps. You're making a mistake, he said softly. You don't know who I know. I don't care who you know, I replied, stepping out. I care who you broke. He chuckled. Cute. That was the last word he said before the doors shut behind him. The interrogation room was colder than necessary. No windows. Just a steel table, 1 flickering light, and 2 chairs facing each other like old enemies reunited. Monroe and I took turns. We laid the evidence out like pages in a confession. Signatures, kickbacks, internal policy rewrites with his initials, transfers to bury misconduct, bonuses tied to aggressive arrest quotas. It was all there, and yet he didn't flinch. I'll be out in 48 hours, he said. Even if I'm not, you think this system folds because one old man gets put in cuffs. He leaned in. Langston, let me teach you something. Power doesn't live in rules. It lives in the silence between them. But what Vernon Sykes didn't understand, what men like him never do, is that silence only works until someone decides to break it. And I had already broken mine. That evening, I stood in front of the Department of Justice with over 100 press cameras pointed at my face. Monroe flanked my right, Elaine to my left. Behind me, a sea of names officials advocates, victims, whistleblowers, all with one thing in common. They were done being quiet. I stepped up to the podium. My name is James Langston, I began. And this isn't just about a bad cop. This is about a system designed to protect itself at the expense of its people. a system that shields misconduct behind titles, that rewards silence and punishes truth. I raised the flash drive, the one that started it all. This is no longer evidence. It's a mirror. And it's time every institution in this country takes a long, hard look. What followed was historic. Congressional hearings were scheduled. 3 departments across 2 states opened internal audits. The president ordered a federal task force on systemic abuse in law enforcement. Officer Hawley formally charged with aggravated assault under color of law. But Vernon Sykes, he wasn't done fighting. His lawyers moved to suppress the evidence, claimed political persecution, spun media narratives, until one witness, a retired sergeant with nothing left to lose, stepped forward and testified under oath. We were told to make arrests that looked good on paper. Race wasn't policy, but it was practice. And Sykes, he built the damn playbook. The courtroom was packed that day. Sykes stared at me from the defense table, no longer smiling. When the verdict came guilty on 6 counts, he didn't flinch. But I saw it, that tiny crack in his armor, that first moment of realization that the world he thought would never change already had. Back outside, Monroe exhaled beside me. "We actually did it," she whispered. "No," I said. "We started it. The next morning, I drove Bella to school myself. No security escort. No press trailing behind. Just a father and his niece." She looked up at me as I buckled her in and asked, "Are the bad guys gone now?" I paused, then knelt to her level. "Some are," I said. "But the rest will keep fighting until they are." She smiled and handed me her tiny plastic badge. "For backup," she whispered. That night, I taped it to my office wall right next to my presidential seal, because one reminds me who I am, and the other, who I'm fighting for. The courthouse steps were clean that day. Too clean. Like someone had power-washed away the protests, the chants, the tears. But they hadn't, because the weight of a moment like this doesn't vanish with water. It stays in the cracks. It lingers in silence. And that morning silence was all I heard as I stood before the podium flashbulbs, clicking like distant gunfire. The press waited, but I wasn't here to speak. I was here to mourn. His name was Jamal Rivera, 22, unarmed, shot 2 years ago by a patrol officer who mistook a cell phone for a weapon. It never made headlines. No viral video. Just a grieving mother and a folded hoodie on a bedroom floor. Jamal's case had been buried, but our investigation had uncovered the cover-up. His file marked resolved was found in the Sykes dossier. Nothing had been resolved, and today his mother, Rosa Rivera, would speak before Congress. She was small, brown-skinned, wrinkles where youth used to live. She clutched a photo of Jamal as if letting go would kill him again. "I don't want revenge," she told the chamber. "I want recognition. My boy mattered. He existed. And they erased him." I stood in the back of the hearing room, hands balled at my sides. No cameras turned to me. Good, because I was crying. Later, Rosa approached me. "You're the one who dug it up," she said. "Thank you." I shook my head. "I'm sorry it took this long." She nodded, then did something I wasn't ready for. She reached up, placed her hand over my heart, and whispered, "Keep carrying them. All of them." That night I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming below my window like a warning and a lullaby all at once. I poured a glass of whiskey I didn't finish, opened a drawer, and pulled out the file we hadn't touched yet. Langston James Internal Risk Evaluation. My own clearance review. The one they'd quietly initiated after the Hawley video went viral. I flipped to the last page. Subject is considered high integrity, but potentially volatile under systemic pressure. Displays tendencies toward ethical insubordination. I laughed. Ethical insubordination. That's what they called it when you refuse to shut up, when you carry truth like a weapon, when you fight like your skin is your witness. I called Monroe. I want to go public, with what she asked, with everything, the videos, the documents, the systemic structure, all of it. Silence. Then you'll never be safe again. I'm not safe now. She didn't argue. We held the press conference 3 days later. This time, I didn't wear a suit. I wore a hoodie. Black. Plain. Just like the one Jamal wore the day he was shot. I stood in front of the American flag and read every name we'd uncovered. Every erased file. Every redacted line that cost someone a son, a father, a life. The press didn't interrupt. The world didn't blink. Because the truth, spoken calmly by a man who should have been a statistic but refused it, has a gravity that crushes doubt. Elaine was crying as I stepped off stage. You just detonated the whole system. Good, I said. Maybe now we can build something that doesn't bury people alive. That night I was offered resignation by the White House. Not demanded. Offered. Armitage sat across from me, sleeves, rolled eyes heavy. You did what no one else could, he said. But the world doesn't like mirrors, James. And this one's too big to ignore. I nodded. You want me to step down? I want you to decide. You stay, we brace for war. You leave, you do it on your terms, and you don't stop fighting. I looked out the window. Beyond the lawn, a child ran with a plastic flag in her hand. She looked like Bella. I stayed, not because I believed the system had changed, but because it finally knew I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, my office door was covered in Post-its, not threats, thank yous, from interns, staffers, agents I'd never met, a few in handwriting that shook. For my brother, you made me believe again. I'm still here because of you. I didn't reply to them. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, breathing in something rare. Hope, not the loud kind, the steady kind, the kind you carry. Because people like me, we don't put down the weight. We turn it into movement, into memory, into a mirror the country can't look away from anymore. It didn't happen with an explosion, not with a ruling, not even with an apology. Change came with a whisper, not because it was quiet, but because it came from us. From the people who'd been told their voices didn't matter. From the bodies buried under silence who had finally risen. And I was one of them. The morning I stepped back into the White House, I passed through the same security gate I always did. Same badge, same ID, same Secret Service nod. But this time they looked me in the eye, not just with recognition, with respect. In the Roosevelt Room, I met with a newly formed commission, the National Council on Justice Integrity, formed in direct response to Operation Null Shield. 17 members, majority black and brown, half female, veterans, mothers, civil rights leaders, former officers who blew the whistle. I was named chair. President Armitage looked at me across the long oak table and simply said, "Burn the old map." So we did. We rewrote what oversight meant. Not just paperwork and disciplinary action, but surveillance from within. Public access to complaint records, real-time auditing of patrol data, new training that centered empathy, not escalation, and a clause that stripped immunity from any officer found lying in a report. Radical, maybe, but justice doesn't grow in the shade of comfort. It needs sunlight. Hawley's sentencing came 6 weeks later, 3 years federal time. People said it wasn't enough. Maybe it wasn't. But what mattered more was why he went down not for a mistake, but for a pattern, for the system he represented. The precedent had shifted. A crack had formed in the wall, and light was finally leaking through. As for Vernon Sykes, He didn't speak at his final hearing, didn't plead, didn't beg, just stared at me from across the courtroom like he still couldn't believe I hadn't disappeared. He was sentenced to 12 years fraud abuse of authority obstruction of justice. He left the chamber in cuffs. The silence afterward was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The next morning, I stood in front of Bella's classroom. Career day. Tiny hands reached up toward me. Eyes wide, voices full of the kind of innocence this world doesn't deserve. "Are you a superhero?" one boy asked. I laughed. "No," I said. "But I fight bad guys just the same." They gasped. And then Bella stood beside me holding her plastic badge proudly on her chest. "My uncle saves people," she declared, even when they don't believe him at first. Out of the mouths of children. When I left that school, I paused in the hallway, saw a black janitor watching me mop in hand, eyes tired but warm. He didn't say a word, just gave me a nod, one I felt in my bones. That night I stood in front of the mirror, held up my federal badge, stared past the seal, and into the reflection of a man who had nearly been flattened by the weight of a country that only saw his skin until he forced them to see everything else. Not just a government official, not just a black man, but a bridge and a reckoning. I recorded one final message. For the world. For the ones still fighting. For the ones still afraid. My name is James Langston. I was told to step away from the car, but I didn't, and I won't, because every time we step back, they redraw the line. So now we step forward, together, with truth, with courage, with eyes wide open. And this time we carry the seal with us, not because it gives us power, but because it reminds them we were always worthy of it. The screen faded to black, and across the country millions watched, some in silence, some in tears, some in rage, but all of them watching, because the mirror was too big to ignore now. And the man holding it, he wasn't stepping away ever again. James Langston didn't raise his voice. He raised the truth, and that was louder than any siren. From being profiled in a parking lot to standing before Congress with the nation behind him, he proved that justice doesn't wear a uniform. It walks with courage. He didn't just expose a racist cop. He dismantled a system that let men like that hide behind badges and silence. This story reminds us it doesn't matter what titles we hold or how high we climb, some people will still see only our skin. But that's exactly why we must speak up, because silence is permission, and courage. Courage is when you fight not because you're safe, but because others aren't. Change begins the moment we refuse to step back. If this story moved, you don't scroll past. Subscribe to this channel for more real, powerful cinematic stories like this one. Drop a comment. What would you do if you witnessed injustice like this? Share this video because someone in your life needs to hear it. Your voice matters. Let's be louder than silence.